At 0730 hours, on July 24, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Daspit stood in the conning tower of USS Tenosa, his eyes fixed through the periscope, watching a massive 19,000-ton Japanese tanker, Tonin Maru No. 3, sitting completely dead in the water, 2,000 yards away. From his first salvo, he had already launched 2 Mark 14 torpedoes. The tanker was crippled, listing to starboard, completely immobile. No escort vessels anywhere in sight. The sea was calm, the morning sun glinting off the tanker's rust-streaked hull. Daspit had all the time in the world. This was a perfect kill, the kind every submarine commander dreamed about. A sitting duck. No pressure, no threats, just a disabled ship waiting to be destroyed. He maneuvered Tenosa into textbook position, perpendicular to the target's beam, 875 yards away. So close he could read the ship's name on the bow through the periscope. He could count the portholes. This was point-blank range for a submarine attack. He gave the order, fire. The first torpedo left the tube. 30 seconds later, it struck the tanker. A metallic clang echoed through Tenosa's hull. The crew heard it clearly. Metal striking metal. No explosion. Daspit ordered another torpedo, then another. A third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th. Every single torpedo ran perfectly. Every single torpedo hit exactly where he aimed. The crew felt each impact reverberate through the hull. Clang, 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 like hammers on an anvil. Not one exploded. The torpedo room knew something was wrong. The fire control team knew it. Daspit knew it. Yet they kept firing. Maybe the next one would work. It didn't. Daspit had started with 16 torpedoes. His first salvo of 4 had produced 2 crippling hits. Then 11 more, one by one, from a perfect firing position. 11 hits, 11 metallic clangs, 11 duds. The tanker sat there, damaged but still afloat, mocking them. Daspit had only 1 torpedo left. He kept it, ordered Tenosa to surface, and head for Pearl Harbor. He was bringing proof. Proof that American submarines were going to war with weapons that didn't work. What Daspit didn't know was that this failed attack would force the U.S. Navy to admit, finally, after 21 months, that the Mark 14 torpedo was fundamentally broken. And that broken weapon was killing American submariners while letting Japanese shipping sail unharmed across the Pacific. The first American submarine commander to notice the Mark 14 was catastrophically flawed was Lieutenant Commander Tyrell Jacobs, commanding USS Sargo, on December 24, 1941, just 17 days after Pearl Harbor. Sargo fired 8 torpedoes at Japanese merchant ships. Jacobs heard them strike the hulls, metallic clangs echoing through Sargo's sonar, but no explosions. The ships sailed away untouched. Jacobs filed a detailed report. He stated flatly, "The torpedoes hit, but they didn't detonate." The Bureau of Ordnance reviewed the report and concluded the problem was crew error. The torpedoes were fine. Jacobs must have made a mistake in the attack setup. This response would become the Bureau's standard answer for the next 18 months. Submarine commanders reported torpedo failures. The Bureau of Ordnance blamed the commanders. Lieutenant Commander Richard Voge, commanding USS Sailfish, fired 14 torpedoes at Japanese merchant ships in January 1942. Through his periscope, he watched torpedo after torpedo, running under the target's sterns or keels, without exploding. He reported the torpedoes ran too deep, at least 10 feet deeper than set. The Bureau replied, the torpedoes were correct. The problem must be improper attack geometry or poor fire control. Other submarine commanders reported the same. Lieutenant Commander Lewis Parks, USS Pompo, attacked a Japanese freighter in January 1942. 6 torpedoes fired from perfect position. All ran under the target. The freighter sailed away unharmed. Parks reported the torpedoes ran too deep. Bureau blamed his depth-setting procedures. Lieutenant Commander James Coe, USS Skipjack, attacked a Japanese aircraft carrier on Christmas Day, 1941. Less than 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, he fired 4 torpedoes at close range. All either missed or failed to explode. He later wrote in his patrol report that Japanese anti-submarine measures were so ineffective, a submarine could follow Japanese ships into the bay, yet his torpedoes wouldn't sink them. By March 1942, submarine skippers across the Pacific were filing reports of torpedoes running too deep, torpedoes hitting targets without exploding, torpedoes detonating prematurely before impact. The patterns were consistent: different submarines, different crews, different commanders. But the Bureau of Ordnance insisted there was nothing wrong with the Mark 14. They designed it, they tested it, they said it worked. The man who would finally shatter this wall of denial was Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood. In May 1942, Lockwood took command of submarines in the Southwest Pacific, operating out of Fremantle, Australia. He was 52, a lifelong submarine officer, a man who had commanded subs since World War I. His crews called him Uncle Charlie. He listened to his people, and when his submarine commanders told him their torpedoes weren't working, Lockwood believed them. He was different from many flag officers. He knew submarines. He knew the weapons. He knew what worked and what would get his men killed. Most importantly, he trusted his skippers. When they reported failures, he didn't assume excuses. He assumed truth, and he was determined to prove it. In June 1942, Lockwood did something that violated nearly every protocol in the Navy chain of command. Without permission from the Bureau of Ordnance, without official authorization, he pulled a submarine off combat patrol and used it for his own torpedo tests. He didn't ask, because he knew they would say no. So he simply did it. He fired torpedoes at specific depth settings. Through submerged fishing nets in Frenchman Bay near Albany, Australia, after each shot, the crew measured the holes the torpedoes punched in the nets. The method was simple, but undeniable. If a torpedo set for 10 feet passed through the net at 21 feet, it was running 11 feet too deep. The results were absolute. The Mark 14 was running, on average, 11 feet deeper than set, sometimes 15. Lockwood now had proof. He sent the results to the Bureau of Ordnance. The Bureau reviewed the evidence and dismissed it. They claimed the tests were flawed, the nets were set wrong, the submarine wasn't trimmed correctly, the depth-setting mechanism must have been calibrated improperly. They insisted nothing was wrong with the Mark 14. They designed it. They tested it. Therefore, it worked. Any contradictory evidence had to be wrong. But the real issue was simple. When engineers increased the warhead weight years earlier, they never recalibrated the depth sensor. The heavier warhead made the torpedo ride deeper. This wasn't a minor issue. A torpedo running 11 feet too deep would slide under a destroyer, and harmlessly beneath a merchant ship's hull. Once identified, the fix was straightforward. Recalibrate the mechanism. Move the pressure sensor to the torpedo's mid-body where readings were accurate. By late 1942, the depth problem was solved, but new problems emerged. Now that torpedoes were hitting instead of running under, commanders realized the next flaw. They were hitting without exploding. The Mark 14 used the Mark 6 exploder. It had 2 systems. One, a magnetic influence trigger designed to sense a ship's magnetic field and detonate beneath the keel. 2, a contact trigger designed to detonate on impact. The magnetic trigger was supposed to be revolutionary. One perfect explosion under the keel, snap the ship's back, sink it with a single shot. But the magnetic trigger was failing catastrophically. Lieutenant Commander John Scott, commanding USS Tunney, found himself in a perfect attack position on April 9, 1943. 3 Japanese aircraft carriers ahead of him. Scott only 880 yards away. Close enough to see aircraft on the decks through his periscope. He fired all 10 torpedoes, carefully aimed at all 3 targets. He heard 7 explosions. For a moment, the crew believed they had hit, but through the periscope, all 3 carriers held their course. None slowed, none turned, none showed damage. Every explosion was premature. Intelligence later confirmed all 7 torpedoes blew up early. The magnetic influence trigger had sensed the carrier's magnetic fields from a distance and detonated before reaching the hulls. A premature explosion didn't damage the target. It only warned the enemy. A miss was silent. A premature blast told every destroyer exactly where to hunt. The magnetic trigger had 3 core problems. First, Earth's magnetic field varies by location. The Bureau tested the exploder near Rhode Island, but the Pacific had different magnetic conditions, causing early or no detonations. Second, the trigger was hypersensitive. Small magnetic variations set it off prematurely. Third, the mechanism was flawed. Water leaked into the exploder, corroding internal connections. Brush riggings powering the magnetic sensor failed under combat stress. Lockwood wanted it deactivated immediately, but he needed authority. He got it on June 24, 1943, from Admiral Chester Nimitz himself. Pacific Fleet submarines were ordered to shut off the magnetic exploder and use contact detonation only. That solved the premature blast problem, but it revealed the third major defect. The contact exploder was also broken. This brings us back to Lawrence Daspit, Antonin Maru No. 3, on July 24, 1943. With the magnetic trigger disabled, his torpedoes should have exploded on impact. Instead, 9 perfect hits became 9 duds. Daspit returned to Pearl Harbor with 1 unexploded torpedo. He handed it over to the torpedo shop for analysis. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood met him at the pier. Lockwood later wrote, "I expected a torrent of cussing, damning me. The Bureau of Ordnance, the Newport Torpedo Station, and the torpedo shop. I wouldn't have blamed him. 19,000-ton tankers don't grow on trees." But Dan was so furious, he was practically speechless. Lockwood ordered immediate testing. Pearl Harbor torpedo specialists fired torpedoes into underwater cliffs off Kahulawi Island. They dropped dummy torpedoes from cranes, smashing them onto steel plates at different angles. The results exposed the fatal flaw. The contact mechanism's firing pin was badly designed. The firing pin was too heavy. When a torpedo struck a target at a perfect 90-degree angle, the sudden deceleration generated forces over 500 Gs. That force bent the firing pin before it could strike the percussion cap. A glancing hit might work, but a perfect shot, exactly what submarine doctrine required, was the most likely to fail. The torpedo shop disassembled Daspit's dud. Inside, they found exactly what the test predicted: a bent firing pin, a damaged housing, a mechanism that collapsed under impact stress. Lockwood authorized immediate field modifications. Pearl Harbor's torpedo shop created a lighter, stronger firing pin, using aluminum salvaged from the propellers of downed Japanese aircraft. By September 1943, submarines departing Pearl Harbor carried modified firing pins. By November 1943, all 3 major defects were fixed: depth control, corrected; magnetic trigger, deactivated; contact trigger, redesigned. For the first time since the war began, American submarines, finally, had reliable torpedoes. 21 months after Pearl Harbor. 21 months of sending submariners into combat with weapons that failed. 21 months of ships escaping that should have been sunk. The man driving every fix was Charles Lockwood. Lockwood fought the Bureau of Ordnance at every turn. He ran unauthorized tests when the Bureau refused. He meticulously documented every torpedo failure. He collected patrol reports from dozens of submarine commanders, all describing torpedo malfunctions. He compiled statistics showing American submarines were firing 10 torpedoes for every confirmed sinking. That ratio should have been 3 to 1 at most. The problem wasn't the commanders, it was the weapons. Lockwood empowered his submarine commanders. He gave them permission to modify torpedoes. When official changes were delayed, some submarines disabled magnetic exploders on their own initiative, breaking regulations because they knew the devices didn't work. Lockwood covered for them. He didn't court-martial anyone. In early 1943, he flew to Washington to confront Bureau officials directly. He walked into a room of senior officers, many of whom had designed the Mark 14, and did not want to admit it was flawed. Lockwood presented his evidence, test results, patrol reports, statistics. He demonstrated the magnetic exploder was unreliable. He proved submarines were hitting targets without sinking them. The Bureau officers were defensive. They claimed commanders mishandled torpedoes. They suggested magnetic exploders were damaged by rough handling. They offered every excuse, except that their design was flawed. Lockwood lost his temper. If the Bureau of Ordnance cannot provide torpedoes that hit and explode, or a gun larger than a pea shooter, then for God's sake, get the Bureau of Ships to design a boat hook to rip the plates off a target's side. The room went silent. Nobody spoke to the Bureau that way. But Lockwood didn't care about protocol. He cared about his submariners. He was sending men to war with defective weapons, and the bureaucrats who designed them cared more about covering their mistakes than fixing them. Lockwood made it clear he wouldn't leave Washington until action was taken. He had Admiral Nimitz's support. He had proof. And he wasn't backing down. Lockwood also made another critical move. He relieved submarine commanders who were not aggressive enough. In the war's first year, many skippers were cautious, following pre-war doctrine, emphasizing risk avoidance. They would make one attack, fire torpedoes, then retreat. Lockwood demanded aggressive action. His philosophy: take calculated risks, push the attack, fire when the target is most vulnerable. It was a shift from timid tactics to decisive strikes. As torpedo reliability improved, American submarines transformed into lethal weapons. They started controlling the sea lanes, cutting Japanese supply lines, strangling Japan's economy with precision and persistence. Meanwhile, Japanese submarines, despite technical excellence, accomplished almost nothing. They had working torpedoes, advanced submarines, but strategic mistakes rendered their efforts irrelevant. The first American submarine commanders to experience these failures had been on edge for months. Every patrol carried uncertainty. Every torpedo fired was a gamble. Yet under Lockwood, the tide turned. Tests corrected depth settings. Magnetic triggers were deactivated. Contact triggers were redesigned. Confidence returned to submarine crews. Patrol after patrol, targets sank. Japanese merchant shipping was destroyed in record numbers. The once impotent U.S. submarine force became the silent killer of the Pacific. The difference was leadership, evidence, action. Lockwood's insistence that men be equipped with functional weapons saved lives and accelerated Japan's defeat. By late 1943, the American submarine campaign was irreversible. Japanese logistics crumbled. Critical supplies never reached islands or garrisons. Fuel, food, ammunition, all lost at sea. American torpedo reliability now allowed precision attacks. Commanders executed attacks with doctrine perfected. 90-degree shots, optimal range, maximum effect. Ships once impervious to damage, now sunk in single torpedo strikes. The statistical evidence was clear. Before the fixes, 10 torpedoes per sinking. After modifications, efficiency improved dramatically. The weapon was no longer the weak link. Submarine crews could trust their tools. Lockwood's actions established a precedent. Testing in the field, challenging authority, defending crews, all became lessons for modern naval operations. He prioritized operational success and sailor safety over bureaucracy. American submarines, once hindered by flawed weapons, were now a decisive force. Every patrol carried lethal potential. Every strike mattered. The balance of power in the Pacific had shifted. The story of the Mark 14 torpedo is a story of failure, persistence, and ultimate triumph. 21 months of flawed weapons, hundreds of American lives lost, thousands of Japanese ships spared, could have been avoided with timely action. Lockwood's leadership changed history. He defied protocol. defied bureaucracy, tested the weapons himself, and protected his crews from punishment. By November 1943, the torpedo issues were fixed, depth control corrected, magnetic triggers disabled, contact triggers redesigned. American submarines now had reliable torpedoes. The silent service became the decisive edge in the Pacific. Ships sank with precision. Japanese supply lines were destroyed. And the submarine campaign became, according to Japanese testimony, the single greatest factor in their defeat. Meanwhile, Japanese submarines, despite technical excellence, failed to impact the war's outcome. Strategic errors rendered their tools ineffective. The Mark 14 saga is not only a tale of engineering failure, but of leadership, courage, and the relentless pursuit of truth in the unforgiving expanse of the Pacific War.